The stars were a beautiful, endless expanse, something she had seen from the comfort of the ship before everything had gone wrong. But now, the stars seemed far too distant, like mocking reminders of how small and helpless she was. Alone, trapped, abandoned. Vara had always been a fighter. As a member of the elite Terran fleet, she had faced countless dangers and threats across the galaxies. But nothing, absolutely nothing, could have prepared her for this. Her escape pod had crash-landed on a forgotten planet, far from the reach of her allies, with no hope of rescue. The pod had been damaged during the escape from a battle she couldn't even remember. The impact with the harsh, rocky surface of the planet had been violent, leaving her with a few bruises and a raging headache. But worse than the physical pain was the reality of her situation. The ship had been destroyed, the planet was uninhabited, and her emergency signal was barely functional. She tried everything to repair it. Her fingers were sore from repeatedly pressing the distress signal, hoping, praying that someone, anyone, would hear her. The days blurred into one another as she tried to stay sane, trapped in the metallic confines of the pod with only the hum of the emergency systems for company. The outside world was a desolate wasteland, devoid of life. Dust storms swept across the barren land, and every now and then she could hear distant crashes that made her think she was not alone. But those were just the winds, carrying with them the faint sounds of a planet that had long since forgotten its purpose. Vara had never been one to give up easily. She had been trained to survive, to endure, to push through even the most impossible of odds. But as the days wore on, and food and water ran out, hope became harder to cling to. Her communication systems were down. The pod sensors couldn't detect any signs of life on the planet. She was utterly alone, and if no one could hear her distress signal, what was the point of continuing? Why keep fighting? That was the thought that gripped her one cold night as she stared out at the desolate landscape through the cracked viewport. Maybe it was time to accept that this was the end. Maybe she would just sleep forever, her body becoming part of this dead world. But just as the thought took hold, something changed. A faint crackle, a burst of static. Her heart skipped a beat. The sound was weak, distant, but it was there. Someone had heard her signal. Across the galaxy, a human soldier named Jacob O'Connor was aboard a reconnaissance ship, slowly patrolling the quiet reaches of space, far from any conflicts. He was a veteran of countless battles, a seasoned explorer who had seen the worst the universe had to offer. But today was different. He had just been about to call it a day when a faint signal pinged on his comms, a distress beacon from a planet in a forgotten star system. His initial scan showed no ships in orbit, no signs of activity. It was a lifeless planet, abandoned for centuries. But there was a single, broken distress signal from a pod, indicating someone was alive. Jacob hesitated, but only for a moment. His instincts as a soldier told him there was someone out there in need of help. And if there was one thing he couldn't ignore, it was a cry for help. He engaged his ship's FTL drives, setting course for the source of the signal. Hours later, he arrived in orbit around the barren planet. The surface was a mixture of rocky deserts and craters, nothing but remnants of forgotten life. But his scanners pinpointed the pod, damaged but still functioning enough to send out its distress call. Vara was half conscious when she heard the familiar hum of an engine in the distance, a deep vibration that resonated within her chest. The sound sent adrenaline coursing through her veins. Her hands fumbled for the pod's communication system again, and this time, when she spoke, her voice was steady, urgent. "Please help," she managed, knowing this could be her only chance. Her words were broken by the crackling of the system, but she didn't care. She had to be heard. Just moments later, the pod's hatch popped open with a soft hiss. She barely had the strength to sit up, but she could make out a figure standing outside, silhouetted against the light of the setting sun. He wore the distinctive armor of a human soldier, something she had only seen in passing before during her fleet's missions. "Who are you?" she asked, her voice hoarse. The man stepped forward, revealing his face. He was young, maybe a little older than her, with short-cropped brown hair and a rugged expression. But what stood out most was the concern in his eyes, the way he immediately dropped to his knees beside her. "Name's Jacob," he said, his voice calm but urgent. "I'm here to get you out of here." Vara's vision blurred as he helped her sit up, his hands firm but gentle. She felt weak, exhausted, like her body had been stripped of its will to keep going. But his presence, his voice, pulled her back from the edge. "I'm not going to leave you here," he continued. "We're getting off this rock. Hold on for me." It was the first time in days that she felt like she wasn't completely alone. Jacob's ship was small but efficient, a reconnaissance vessel that could easily handle quick escapes. He had a small med kit that he used to check her vitals and administer some basic medical treatment. She was dehydrated, malnourished, and weak, but he had seen worse. He was a soldier after all. Helping people was what he did best. As they made their way to his ship, Jacob stayed by her side. There was no question in his mind that he would get her back to safety. As the ship's engines hummed to life and they broke through the atmosphere, he let out a small sigh of relief. The horizon stretched wide before them, endless and full of promise. Vara sat back in the seat, feeling the weight of the situation lift from her shoulders for the first time in what felt like forever. She was alive. She was free. And it was all thanks to this human soldier who had risked his life to find her. Days later, back on the human military base, Vara found herself in a safe room, recovering. Jacob had kept his promise to get her out, and the medical team there had quickly gotten her back to health. But beyond the physical healing, there was a deeper change that had taken place. She wasn't just alive. She was valued. She was seen. And for the first time, she felt like she belonged. Jacob had taken it upon himself to make sure she felt at ease, guiding her through everything that came next. His humanity, his compassion for someone he didn't even know, had been the beacon that brought her back from the brink. She was no longer a mere survivor, alone and forgotten. She was a woman who had been found, who had been saved, and who had a future, thanks to a soldier from Earth. And as they sat together in the mess hall, sharing a quiet meal, Vara realized that sometimes the most unexpected connections were the ones that changed everything. Sometimes, all it took was a human soldier picking up a signal to turn everything around.